Yes, yes. Welcome to the ancient world of tabletop games. I am Agamemnon, from the historical documentary, Time Bandits. This is a report from a fugitive. What is a legacy game? Imagine a game of poker in which one lucky player sets down 4 aces and a king. If this is the winning hand, congratulations. There are other card combinations that beat 4 of a kind, a straight flush, for example. 5 cards in numbered sequence, all from the same suit in the deck. Now imagine the game state after a win for 4 of a kind. The cards are picked up and shuffled. By shuffled, I mean thoroughly shuffled, to a point that we'll call as random can be. The recommendation for randomness is a riffle shuffle made 7 to 11 times. Interleaving of a deck broken into 2 sub-decks, performed 11 times over, should satisfy all but the most skeptical onlooker. That's random. Play proceeds through many games, several game sessions spread across different poker nights, lots of shuffling, much bluffing, and legendary consumption of food and drink. Now we start a new game. Courage and shuffle the cards. Shut up and deal. There is no legacy element to the cards. They are the same pasteboard tombstones that will drag your poker chips to their doom if you play averagely or badly. The table itself has no memory, even if the players around it harbor grudges. Read 'em and weep. The game deck is randomized, but it is ultimately unchanged. Card games revolve around 52 cards in 4 suits. Going by the type of game, 2 jokers may or may not feature in play, and that's it. That's all she wrote for basic gameplay. Now, return to that hand, 4 of a kind. Say we had a new rule, a legacy rule. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, right? Time for change. Here's the new rule. Any losing hand containing 4 of a kind must lose a card from the collection of 4. That card is torn in half, placed in an ashtray, and roasted away to dust. What happens in one game now affects all other games that follow, using that diminished deck. The element of bluff is altered. Do you want to throw down your 4 of a kind, thinking no one else can beat it? Fold your 4 aces and no one is any the wiser. But show your cards and lose. Well, now you must ditch an ace from the game, forever. In the next game, no one benefits directly from the lost ace. This missing piece discounts certain combinations and indirectly influences players. The table has no memory? By introducing a legacy element with the removal of cards, suddenly the table has memory loss, and the nature of play shifts accordingly to take account of this. That's a legacy game, a game in which permanent change to game components alters the next game. Further permanent change alters the game after that, and so on. In this example, the losing player now decides which of the 4 ace-high royal flushes to eliminate from the game from this point forward. How often will high-ranking cards beat 4 of a kind? That's not the issue. You'd need far more rules for legacy poker than I've listed here, but you now have the basic concept in front of you based on my rather severe and limited example. You needn't destroy cards. For purposes of eventually resetting the game, yes, just set the lost cards aside. Or reverse the trend and play with a second deck handy. Instead of losing cards, add them to the deck. Then you could come away from a game with a new winning hand, 5 of a kind. Let's turn from cards to boards and legacy board games, which may well include cards anyway. One person is more responsible for the creation and development of the legacy game than any other gamer in the world, and don't let anyone tell you different. That person was really 2 people, E. Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, and the game in question was the role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons. In D&D, players create characters and run those characters through adventures in fantasy settings. Taking a tobacco leaf out of Tolkien's book, one of the main features of a fantasy RPG is the campaign world, which calls for a campaign map. The feature of play that interests us here is the idea that players are heroic figures who can and do bring change to the world. This should be positive change, though accidental negative change often occurs. Deliberate negative change is a topic for another time, for that merely serves to remind me of the dreaded Yahtzee incident, a tale too terrible to tell, and that isn't a board gaming fact, it's an RPG one. Change to the world means changes to the map of the world. It's a highly regular thing in an RPG to see the map altered by the player's actions. New villages are founded, adding script to the map showing those locations. Other places are lost to the floods and are erased from the world. The concept of actions causing consequences is a notion that fits well into the RPG world. It is this requirement for change in the RPG that finds its way into the board game side of things, and it's no surprise that the one person more responsible for legacy board games than any other, Rob Daviau, was heavily inspired by D&D. This is Pandemic, designed by Matt Leacock. Players team up to fight the game itself. Pandemic beats every player if diseases run rampant across the globe. It's a cooperative game. All players win together if they fight off the diseases. With the card decks thoroughly shuffled each time, the game has no memory, though players will always remember that obscure side shopping trip to Moscow by noted disease expert Dame Brenda Bradley, sipping samovar-brewed tea within sight of the Kremlin, and being maligned as a Soviet agent by super-intense political groupie and part-time scientist Carrie Whitegood, who believes Stalin is still pulling the strings from beyond his fake grave. Her constant references to Soviets grated on Dame Brenda's sense and sensibility. We played regular Pandemic and created our own characters and stories out of the random arrival of disease cubes. Playing as Dame Judi Dench, playing as Dame Brenda Bradley, I went out on a long, shaky limb to help nudge the mission in the right direction. Meanwhile, Carrie Whitegood schmoozed around with politicos in Washington and put unreasonable demands on my cash-strapped lab/newsagent stand on the London Underground. Whitegood flaunted a designer lab coat in Michael Bay's idea of a designer lab and wore shades with mirrors on the inside, much like Michael Bay. She took all the credit for all the good moves and none of the credit for the shit that went down. In a disaster movie, she'd be the disaster. Why is this evil woman belittling Dame Judi Dench? Won't an erupting volcano, falling meteor, or genetically modified dinosaur worm unicorn land on the head of this unsympathetic bitch? Personally, I blame the writers. Yes, we create our own stories, but the game resets with each new game. Not so with Pandemic Legacy. The board is larger to accommodate all sorts of legacy-related tricks. Each game is part of a calendar depicting 12 feverish months in disease control. Unrest in cities carries from one game to the next using stickers on the board to record permanent change. Rules alter with the unfolding of events. We write our own unique stories across the map, D&D RPG style, transforming that map and reshaping the narrative with each game. January's news events linger into February's drama, and both months' misadventures will spark knock-on effects into March and beyond. For video production purposes, I won't be placing footery stickers on rioting cities as the cameras roll. Instead, I'll use a dice map recording the level of unrest generated in each game, but you get the idea. A legacy game is a hybrid of role-playing game and board game. Worldwide, players sit down to play the game, same game, but by the end of play, the stickers or toxic dice are in different places. The end state of the final game carries its own scars and doodles across the campaign map that don't match up to another gaming group's final board. That's the point. You play an adventure in D&D exactly once, and we hope you have a whale of a time. A legacy board game is meant to set the same prospect in front of players. You'll play the whole of Pandemic Legacy exactly once, and that'll be your adventure. Though I must add this point. If you are the person running an RPG, the dungeon master, the game master, then you can repeatedly run one adventure with different player groups, creating several distinct legacies on multiple campaign maps featuring many new and different characters, all traipsing through the one setting, whether it's the Dungeon of the Bear or the Temple of Elemental Evil. That's a bonus form of play for the person running the game. I'll attempt to run Pandemic Legacy as a DM, a disease master, online after I've played the game away from the internet. This is one reason for using dice instead of stickers. Resetting the game state after the final match is a damn sight easier if you sweep the dice off that board. Given that the campaign setting of an RPG game is the inspiration for a legacy board game, it seems clear that the best way to run the game for players is by running it the way a game of D&D would be run, using a dungeon master familiar with the story as the impartial referee. We'll see. Success in that endeavour is a video for another time.